Recording. Here we go. We are episode 148 of the 4Ever2Wheels podcast. In the upper left-hand corner, I've got Paul d'Orleans. Lower left-hand corner, I've got Wil Thomas III. And then I've got in the lower right-hand corner, Austin Johnson. Or Shovelhead Austin. Which do you prefer?
Shovelhead Austin's fine. It's fine.
Awesome. Great. So we started these conversations probably a month ago, and the first
Shovelhead Austin's fine. It's fine.
So I've got a playback going on. I'm not sure why. Does somebody else have? Does anybody out there have it playing on there?
I stopped it. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Sorry.
Thanks.
No, I was trying to figure out how to share this onto my own page.
Yeah, no.
That's the Vintagen.
Yeah. So we are here, and we started this probably a month ago, and it was an uncomfortable situation where I wanted to have a conversation about racism in motorcycle culture. Not necessarily in the industry per se, but isn't in the culture. I've been in the motorcycle industry just under 20 years, I guess, and worked in motorcycle magazines, been to a lot of motorcycle rallies, and have seen it, have talked up a few times and haven't on other times. And I feel like generally the motorcycle industry or the motorcycle culture as a whole is pretty welcoming to people. If you're out riding, you're pretty welcoming, but I also feel like there's another side of it that we don't talk about. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. So maybe we can go around just for a moment and maybe just talk, first, maybe Austin, just give us a perspective of what it was like when you started motorcycling, let people know what it was like when you started motorcycling and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, my experience was probably different than a lot of people because I grew up in New York City. And my hangout, once I started riding, was Greenwich Village, which was kind of like a melting pot.
Sure.
And so I was around a lot of people, a lot of different people. As you know, I have a good friend, Spade George, and that's where we met in Greenwich Village. Me and George were into choppers. And in New York City, we didn't see other black guys with choppers. Most of the black guys rode Harleys, but they rode dresses. They didn't ride choppers. This is before Jack.
Did we lose you?
Austin touched his computer again.
Are you there, Austin? It was just getting good too. Oh. Okay, well, then we're going to you. So, Wil, why don't you talk about...
Wait, he's back.
Wait, yeah.
I didn't touch anything. It just went away.
That's so great. I'm just glad you're back. So, so what year was that?
I started riding in 1967.
Okay.
I don't know if you know that. Well, I saw the movie Wild Angels in 1966, and I fell in love with choppers from that movie.
Cool.
And so then in 1967, I got a bike, started riding, and the rest is, how they say, history.
What was that first bike?
The first bike was a Honda CL77, which is a 305 Scrambler. Okay. I didn't know anything about motorcycles. I didn't know anybody that owned a motorcycle. I just knew I wanted one. Yep. And I was into hot rods, and I used to see the Hondas in my hot rod magazines. And so that's what I went and got.
Cool. How about you, Wil? How'd you get into bikes? What'd that look like?
Yeah, that's funny. It's kind of a weird story in that I talked about bikes and dreamed about bikes for a very long time before I actually owned a bike. Okay. So I think the fascination with bikes started in and around, I was in the Marine Corps some years ago. And my very close friend, who's Master Gunny Frazier now, we're going to retire here. We were supposed to retire this week, June 6th. I think it's pushed back to October. But when we would be on deployment, we would often be fantasizing or talking about motorcycles. And it was kind of strange because I used to have the whole kit, the T-shirt, you know what I mean, and the Stussy hat and the whatever. And it occurred to me at one point, why the hell am I running around in this damn T-shirt? I don't even own a bike. So we made a vow that we would never wear another Harley shirt again until we owned a Harley. And by the time I owned a Harley, of course, I probably never really wore a shirt again.
Didn't really want a Harley shirt anymore.
I got one. And
I got one. I'm wearing it today.
No, and guess who gave it to me? Douglas B. Fraser. So it's kind of neat. It comes full circle. But I didn't start writing until much later. I was not well into my 30s, but I was 32 years old, I believe, before I started riding, which is a lot later than most people ride. That first bike was a Kawasaki Eliminator 600, which quickly turned into something I don't talk about very often, but a turnkey chopper situation of a company I don't even know if they exist anymore. And then soon after was the first Harley, and then the first Panhead. It was kind of a rapid ascendance or descendance, if you want to say, after that.
Sure. You were all in, huh?
Oh, it's bad. It's bad.
Well, and Paul, I know, we've had you on the podcast before, so I know a little bit of your history, but I mean, your history with Harley-Davidson and the biker culture wasn't super positive from the beginning.
No, it wasn't. I grew up in Stockton, California, which is a pretty rough town, or was in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. And I had the experience of having a Patch Club chopper rider bust into my home and rob it at gunpoint with a lot of teenage girls in attendance. Of course, those teenage girls had like an ounce of hashish on them and a few $100s of cash. This was 1969. So, but that formed an indelible image to me, of what a motorcyclist was.
Sure.
Now, both of my older brothers rode motorcycles. They rode dirt bikes and they rode street bikes. So, I knew that this was not the totality of Motorcycle Club, but it did, as you mentioned, it did color my view of the chopper scene in the day. We're talking 69. And so, when I was asked to write a book about choppers in 2014, I really had to wrap my head around the whole scene. And so it was a fascinating process. Wil has a lot to do with that process. Austin had a lot to do with that process. They both proved really, really helpful to my education in the scene, and also kind of getting to know there were other people in the scene who thought more like myself. I'll tell you one story about writing that book, though. The Chopper, the Real Story, was I was allowed to dig into the archive of a magazine publisher who shall remain nameless, but who was seminal in the chopper publication industry. And as I was looking for suitable photographs for my book, all he was interested in was showing me his Hitler paraphernalia. So, and
wow.
his magazine was notorious for publishing white power ads and never, ever, ever publishing a story on a black chopper rider. So, there you go. There's two sides of the coin. So
sure.
It kind of confirmed some of my feelings, and I certainly included that some of that story into the book, The Chopper, the Real Story. And because I felt it was, I wanted to tell the whole picture, the real story, which was there were people of all different colors and creeds riding choppers and inventing the genre. And, there was also a lot of media silencing on that fact, a lot of ghosting of the contribution of, African-American and Hispanic riders that seemed pretty silly, that was not the truth.
Yeah. Austin, what's your take on that? I mean, did you experience that? Was that something that you saw? I mean, obviously, I don't know about you, but I read chopper magazines, like devoured them from the time I was interested in motorcycles. So I assume you were consuming that media as well. Then did it seem like you weren't represented in there?
Oh, we weren't represented. Actually, the first chopper magazines, Ed Ross Street Chopper, he included everybody.
Sure.
You could see his magazines. There was black, Spanish, white. Everybody was in there. If you had a chopper and it was cool, he'd put you in his book.
Chopper Digest.
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed, Street Chopper, when it first came out, It used to come out twice a year when it first came out in 1969. The first two issues had a lot of black writers. They did an article on the halfway run, I think it's called, in California, where the guys from the Bay Area, the black cubs from the Bay Area, and the black cubs from Los Angeles meet halfway in the middle of the state, and they have a big drag race party weekend. They did a whole article on that meet, and I seen so many pictures in that issue because a friend of mine had the issue. But as soon as it became a monthly publication that was sold on newsstands, they took all the blacks out. And this is to Paul. I think I met that editor that you were talking about. I was in the Daytona in 1980, and me and a friend of mine were walking down Main Street, and about 30 guys came up behind us and started calling us the N-word. Wow. And when I turned around and looked, it was the editor of that magazine. He didn't know that I know who he is because I read his magazine. Wow. But yeah, it was out there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And, it just confirms my story. It was pretty obvious to me what the situation was there. And it was extremely uncomfortable for me, as an ardent anti-fascist and anti-racist, to sit in the garage of a man who was both. So,
right.
But he had great photos.
Oh yeah.
And, he had photographs of Cliff Voss, who, designed the Easy Rider Shoppers.
Yes.
Which might have had something with the name of the magazine, but I'm not saying anything like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, and maybe, maybe Wil, maybe you can talk about this, being a black rider, right? A black chopper rider. Like it's so, and I don't think it's slowed down at all, but the swastika is used. It's still used on things. The War Eagle is still used, right? It's still used as a symbol. I mean, I have a shirt upstairs in my drawer that has the War Eagle on it, right? Like how offensive is that? Or is it just like, what do you, I'm really curious about kind of your thoughts and feelings on it.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that myself. It's such a slippery slope conversation. It goes without saying that the symbols that sometimes are associated with segments of the chopper community or whatever you want to call it, certainly use what can be considered offensive or threatening or divisive symbols, symbols to include the swastika, the warbird, SS bolts, or whatever. Sure. I think it's so immersive in chopper culture, and you got to realize I'm a little bit younger. And so I don't know if my perspective is necessarily different, but because it's been ingrained and immersed in the culture before I got there, at times you become desensitized to it. So, for example, in my travels, when I'm in Japan or I'm in certain places, it takes on a different hue, even though I know the root meaning of what those things mean. A lot of the kids or a lot of the younger generation are running these symbols almost ignorant of the energy that they project and that they carry historically. Now, I don't know if it was, these cats came back from the war and these were the spoils of war, as some people attempt to articulate, and that's how it filtered into the culture. And or some people feel a certain kind of way and therefore they're representing that ideology through those symbols. I have a feeling that both these things can be true, I often say. So what is fashioned to some is foreboding to others, and is I guess part ideology for other people. And so these symbols and words and things of that nature have meaning, and therefore they have power. And I think that's where we kind of get into some tricky territory. So if you're asking Wil personally, different kind of animal. I've walked a lot of places where maybe I don't even know if I was welcome or not, but in my own choosing, I was walking my path and therefore felt comfortable in a lot of situations where others would not. However, that being said, I think that when you're looking across the landscape now, as far as what people are looking at, they're looking to rewrite some of those narratives and remove some of the symbols that represent hate, divisiveness, prejudice, anger, and by and large, my bike experience has been very inclusive. I think that's what Austin was even saying. Hey man, I was in the Village, on the east side. It was progressive at that time. So the motherfuckers we were dealing with, or he was dealing with, were progressive.
Mm-hmm.
I've dealt with a lot coming from the Midwest, growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, having started my motorcycle background and my chopper background in Chicago. Yeah, I was often and very often still one of none, So I'm one black guy among a host of who knows what, generally. And it wasn't until, some of the magazines and the things that you guys were referencing, I remember very early on, the first time I ever saw an image of a black guy on a chopper. And it was a black guy and a white guy riding together, and I didn't know anything, so I didn't know who or what or the significance of the photo at the time.
Sure.
And this is pretty early. This is very early in the blogs. So we're talking Chopper Dave and, I don't know what else. This is pre-Max Shaft, or if you're into that scene. But I saw this image, and it took me, I'm not kidding, 5 years to find. I was in Chicago when I saw it, and it took me 5 more years. I think I was living in California before a person who should remain nameless, but is kind of a historian in his own right, could not only spit out what image it was, but who was in the image, and not only what magazine it was, but what month it was. And it showed me at that juncture was the first time I realized there's levels to this shit. Mm-hmm. I was still very early on in my thought process, and I was like, man, he spit that off like nothing. So there's
because it was so unique. Is that what you're saying? Because it was so unique.
And he was steeped in the history. He grew up with it. He was steeped in the history.
Sure.
He would have strong knowledge. If you bear with me half a second. Oh, good Lord. Pardon me.
We get to see Wil's study.
Yeah.
Here's that image right there.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Sugar Bear
With
and Mike Bills.
Yeah, Fast Mikey.
And the only thing I knew was it was a black dude and a white dude on a chopper, and I could describe the shot. It was in black and white when I saw it. Yeah. And I said, hey, man, this shot was like a 3/4 shot from the front. They had their chicks with, they had their old ladies with them, and they were riding. And I'm not kidding. It was Mark Drews that told me, by the way. Mark Drews said, Sugar Bear and Mike Bills. And I think he didn't, this is November 72. I think he said September 72. He literally said it. And to Austin's point, here's actually a picture of the Choppers magazine he was representing. And this bike right here is a Sugar Bear front end. And if I'm not mistaken, this was Watusi's bike. Yeah, this is Tusi's bike. And there's Tusi right there, the brother.
Yeah.
So, these cats, Paul and Austin, they're very steeped in history. They were part of it, certainly Austin, early. My thing came a lot longer. And so my perspective on some of those symbols is yeah, man, I'm still even working through some of that. Do I agree with it? No, not really. Does it keep me from going anywhere I want to go? No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm also of a different mindset. If you feel a certain way, I'd rather know. Yeah. Not everybody feels that way.
Sure.
I come from a mindset that I'd rather know.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
You can treat a snake like a snake if you know what it is, you know how to handle it. If you don't know, then it's a little different.
Yeah.
That's my thought. That's a personal thought.
Austin, do you have do you have an opinion about the swastika or hate symbols?
Well, truthfully, I didn't realize they were hate symbols until later on, because in the beginning, I was around when all the vets came back.
Sure.
And all the vets brought that stuff back. It was all over New York City. There were stores. I could go down Times Square and buy any kind of military memorabilia, Japanese, German, American. It was just all over the place, and it was inexpensive. Mm-hmm. There's a photo of me with a German helmet on. Mm. It's a real German helmet, and I paid $10 for the helmet.
Wow.
I didn't have it long. Somebody stole it, but that stuff was all over the place. Knives, everything from the Third Reich was there. It was available. It was part of the rebellion, the counterculture.
Sure.
We don't want to be like everybody else. And that's what guys were putting those stickers on saying. They weren't saying that we hate you or hate Jews. They were just saying, we don't want to be like everybody else. We're different. Back then. Now, what they're doing with it today, now I think is something different.
Yeah.
Today, I think they're showing hate. I feel differently about it today than I did when I first started.
Well, and that's,
Hey,
I can really,
Ken, real quick.
no, go ahead.
Hey, Ken, real quick, just to give a little context as well. So coming from a military background, having been in a combat type situation, having, fought against other people and whatever those people, I mean, if we went right over to this photo album, you would find Iraqi and rank insignia, you'd find all that.
Sure.
So it's I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that the spoils of war, so to speak, is a phenomena. I don't even, and that's coming from a 19-year-old kid. You know what I mean? I'm a 50-year-old man.
Yeah.
51. I don't even know. That's how long. So a 19-year-old kid in the spoils of war and whatever that means or represents in that time may be thought of quite differently in these terms in this day. So I don't think taking Iraqi colonel rank insignias and whatever cigarettes or some dumb shit really meant something back then and don't mean much now. So I kind of wonder, to Austin's point, at that time, it is what it is. And I think people have taken those symbols and attempted to make them, some form of, rebellion or some form of we stand against the man, so to speak. And then these symbols inherently have their own meanings. So people start to rediscover those.
For sure.
Well, and to put in my 2 cents, I came of age, I was in college in the punk era, and, occasionally the swastika was used even by someone, Dame Vivienne Westwood, when she designed the costumes for the Sex Pistols, would occasionally include a swastika with like 2 gay men kissing or something like that. And it was all about shock value. And, and that worked then, but I think things have changed.
Yeah.
I think that, fascism is rearing its ugly head again. And there are people who are explicitly and actively supporting fascist ideology, racist ideology. We have a president who's awfully soft on that matter. And, I think, and I think that the context is everything. The context changes. So maybe it's time to re-examine it. But, as Will said, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I totally agree. You just brought up a memory that I did not even remember. My grandfather was in the Royal Air Force, British soldier during World War II, crashed behind enemy lines he was a reconnaissance glider pilot, and crashed right before they took, they invaded Germany, and he ended up coming back with a ton of Hitler and put some of his daughters through college, and had a swastika armband. And I remember him taking it out, not like, oh, look what I've got, but like you said, the spoils of war. It was, he was an Episcopal minister. Like he didn't have, he didn't have hate in him. He wasn't racist, but he had that. And, I know when, after he passed away, it just disappeared, and so it's an interesting thing. And I think it's to your point, Austin, which is, it's nuance, right? And I think that's a lot of what we're talking about right now. It's like, at least for me, when I see crazy extremism one way or the other, right? It just, that's not what life is, right? Like there's a lot of nuance, so I really appreciate, everyone's answer, because it's not just one thing, like today it's not acceptable, but it makes sense that back in the day, it didn't have the same meaning it does right now.
No, it didn't. It definitely didn't have the same meaning.
And I think that's the same thing with the Confederate flag. I think that it's not the same, but I think it's similar. I think people are starting to understand the symbolism that carries, and starting to understand, the history hasn't changed. It's still there. It's the same thing the same thing happened. It wasn't, history books haven't changed, but I think people are starting to see it in a new light. What are your guys' opinions on that?
Well, I think there's a reason the Confederate edition Harley-Davidson was a one-year model, because even in the 1980s, it was a bad idea.
77, yeah.
Yeah, 77. Yep. You're right.
Yeah, and no, that's fine. But I mean, it's something that they tried to bury, right? It's something that they're not proud of. And when I reached out to them last week and said, hey, I know you haven't done an official stance on this motorcycle, but you have to have one. And I got a very compelling, very corporate, but a compelling answer back, where I was like, okay, like I get it, but you can't bury that stuff, right? It's there. They've been letting their dealers use the Confederate flag until 1996 is when they finally started saying, no, you can't use that anymore. So yeah, it's interesting times for sure.
Yes.
Interesting times, but you got to realize, man, this is an evolution, and it's an evolution in thought process. It's an evolution in our socialization and in our step forward, hopefully, as a country, man. And you got to realize we're only, 52 years out from the Voters' Rights Act or civil rights and all that. We're not that far removed even from slavery, and people want to undermine the impact of some of that. But you got to realize these things are real, and until we deal with some of it's just like anything else, your health, anything else, until you deal with the systemic root of whatever is going on with an issue, you cannot, you're only treating the symptom, you're not treating the issue, the underlying issue. And until we kind of address those things, I have a feeling that this thing will continue to go on. It seems like this is the generation that's finally approaching. Fuck that, we're not having it, and we're going to try to do something about it, or try to eradicate it to the degree. They're going to set a principle that, hey, this is no longer going to be tolerant of this, some of this. And so that's a big part, I think, of what you see going on now. Mm-hmm. Confederate flags, all these symbols. You got to realize in that situation, you have aspects of history that are still present, even though they technically lost the war. They're still very much in the books and very whatever. Mm-hmm. When you talk in terms of history, a lot of people like to say, yeah, his story, not our story. And so what I think from my perspective, Austin could probably speak to it better. I think in some of the narratives, we do feel, you opened it up with this, we feel a little bit, and I say we, meaning probably people of color who ride or chopper dudes or whatever you want to call it, probably feel underrepresented from a narrative standpoint. They haven't, half those stories have never been told, is what Bob would say. So if half the stories never been told, somebody has to tell those narratives. Somebody has to bring to light these stories that really did exist. Not that brothers weren't riding choppers or Hispanic dudes or whoever. They were. It just, to Paul's point earlier, it was not covered in the mainstream media or the mainstream publications, in those cool-ass movies that we all know about. And we were famous. I'm as big a John Wayne movie fan or Clint Eastwood fan as you are. And just like, Wild Angels inspired Austin, it also inspired Sugar Bear and probably countless others to maybe want to embrace that certain aspects of the lifestyle that they could relate to. Yeah. And I don't imagine the Swarovski and all that other shit was part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be interested to know, Austin, what your perspective on, like, what was it that drew you to choppers and motorcycles, knowing that, at that time it was a predominantly white pursuit, right?
For me, that's a kind of a funny question, and I say that because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. My neighborhood was more than 99% white.
Wow.
When I went to school, I never went to school with another black person. Never had another black person in my class. And when I graduated high school in 1964, there was 1,600 students in my graduating class. Not in my school, just in my class alone. Out of that number, the 1,600, there was 4 blacks, 3 boys, and 1 girl. And so I see things maybe a little differently than a lot of people because of that,
Yeah.
And just the different perspective on some things.
Yeah, I mean, how that must have affected you, right?
Oh, it definitely affected me. I mean, yeah, it affected me. But it was what I was used to do because I didn't know anything other than that.
Yeah.
All through school, I only went to school with whites. So how would I know anything else?
Yeah. That's real. That's fascinating. And I think now with everything that's going on and the amount of social media that's out there and the way people consume media, right? Like I feel like there's such more of the story is being told. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or wrong or whatever, but it just means that, there's more, I feel like more of the story is getting out there. I know, Austin, you're on social media quite a bit. What do you see in motorcycle culture in terms of like a response to, the Black Lives Matter movement, that sort of thing?
More people are interested in your story because of the movements. And that's all I really see is just more people interested in your story. The story has always been there, but they weren't interested. Like, there was times in the early 70s where I'd have my bike parked amongst 30, 40 bikes, and guys would walk down the street, see the bike, and flip out. Oh my God, look at this bike, look at this bike. And then they'd start asking, whose bike is this? Whose bike is this? And then when someone would point to me, all of a sudden they're disinterested in the bike.
Wow. And as a crazy,
that's so sad.
Thank God the girls didn't feel the same way. When the girls walked down the street and the girls would say, wow, the guys would say, oh, pick a bike out, whatever bike you want, and that's the bike you can ride on. And if a girl went to my bike and picked it out, she didn't have a problem getting on it.
Outstanding. That's what I want to hear.
That's great. And I think, we deflect with humor, but I imagine that that's really tough, right? To know that you've got the baddest chopper on the block, you're not necessarily getting recognized for it because of the color of your skin.
It wasn't. It wasn't. You know what I mean? Because I would just laugh at it. It would be funny to me because it happened so many times.
Yeah.
That it would just be funny, that they'd be saying whose bike, I'd just be standing right there and not saying nothing,
Yeah.
And then someone would point to me and then not interested anymore. So it got to the point where it was just funny.
Yeah. How so Paul, where do you think we're at in Chopper? You're the historian here, right? You're the one that's written the book. So I'm curious, like, what do you think is happening in the chopper culture right now in terms of race? Like, do you think people are paying attention to that at all right now? Do you think they're trying to include more people? Do you think that there's like a wider lens?
I think it's totally changed. I think the power of social media has been that people are seeing imagery from all the broad spectrum of motorcycling. And people are just looking at what they like, and young people are a lot more open to, or have a lot less boundaries, learned behavior around race. I mean, there is still obviously systemic racism in this country, but I also think that younger people are a lot more open, and I've seen just a much greater mix of people at events and in chopper scenes. I mean, it's still... Sometimes organizers of events will forget to invite, say, a black chopper builder to a major event in a state in the Midwest and have to cover their tracks rapidly. These things still happen. But in terms of the people who are riding, I think it seems like a pretty cool scene. I mean, would you agree, Will? I think.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't speak in terms of sheer numbers. I think, oftentimes it feels unweighted if you're simply talking along color lines. But, I think my experience has been, as of late, to Austin's point, I think people have an appetite. Maybe they're finally ready to see some things. And if you've told the same story over and over and over again, I imagine that if somebody can offer a story that looks distinctly different, it may inherently just have some interest because different than what we've seen. And so these images that have crept to the forefront, whether it's Austin or West Coast stuff or some of the stuff Paul has or and other folks, or it's just, I think Paul would agree that this chopper thing, and I don't know what he discovered. I did assist in helping him with aspects of the book, really just, literally assisting. But I don't know what he gleaned from that experience, but I'd like to think that what was gleaned is a little bit like the notion of spontaneous generation. These things were happening everywhere. And it wasn't, it wasn't as communicative. It wasn't as connected back then. So whatever scene was happening in New York and whatever scene was happening in the West Coast and whatever was happening in the middle of the country or South, people were doing what they were doing. And I don't know if there's a true genesis like Adam and Eve and then they begat the chopper and then they went to that dude. I personally don't believe that that's exactly how it happened. I imagine just like all the other phenomena that we see around the earth, these dudes were building pyramids and those dudes were building pyramids. Or maybe the aliens came and built. Maybe the aliens built the chopper. I don't know. But my point is, I think that the culture was emerging simultaneously in many regions among all manner of people. It just wasn't represented that way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I included in my book, was basically to try and acknowledge all the various influences that went into the creation of this incredible, uniquely American art form,
I think when we start thinking about the chopper, and to Paul's, really his book and really his work centers on the epicenter of when it became whatever to the mainstream. And certainly there was some influence and some tangible things, history that we can point to there of people who are inclusive, people of color that were integral in bringing that to the forefront. It was happening already. Yeah. But they were very much integral in bringing it to the mainstream, but weren't always acknowledged. And I think that's been an ongoing dialogue, not only with Paul, but even Jesse, to some degree, Jesse James shines some light on that with the history of the chopper. Sugar Bear's been a huge proponent of that. Austin has lived it and embodied it, so it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that it because it feels like it's gone. It feels like we're moving forward, right? Like, I remember looking back on when I first started looking at motorcycle magazines, there was not, I was looking at a particular motorcycle magazine that will remain nameless. And it was like, this was, mid to late 90s. And it was still a lot of like white power stuff, and it wasn't, people were not represented. But I feel like now as much as people want to say like, fuck the factory, right? When Harley-Davidson does a post about racism, and then the next week they do one about Pride Week with a big rainbow flag, times are changing, right? Like, I would have never in a million years thought that would have happened from the motor company. And as much as people want to like poo-poo them and, they're not, they're not this, they're not that, they're not whatever. Like that is a change, like at the core level.
I like to interject there just a little bit, if I may. It is absolutely a change, and a change well-deserved, and you want to give some recognition where it's due. At the same time, and anybody else feel free to chime in there, the type of change, right, that I think most people are looking for at this juncture aren't kind of like these brushstroke kind of token gestures.
Totally. Yep.
And you got to realize,
agreed.
I'm sometimes in the middle of the imagery with them and a few other folks, so it's a very delicate place to be, because you don't want to be tokenized, you don't want to be a pawn, you don't want to feel like something is opportunistic. And in this case, I really hope and I believe, and I'd like to believe, that there is a genesis moving towards, like you say, some more systemic. What people are looking for is more systemic.
Yep.
And and just to be real clear, what does that mean? That don't mean, look at their last 3 posts. No, that's not systemic. That goes about every 15 seconds. We're looking at a new post. Yep. Systemic means that your corporate culture, and we don't have to just use the motor company as the example. These are all corporations, all whatever. Some corporations, some companies, some stores, mom and pop situation are more reflective of their ethos and what we would hope things to be. So if you're your leadership, your internal structure is not reflective of your ridership, right? Then that's an opportunity for you. And I think what people are asking at this point is we need to address that at the core. You understand what I'm saying? There's a difference between what you're posting and what you're projecting, and even what you're throwing money at. We're not talking about throw some money at the problem for this time and now you're kind of covered. And hey, boy, guys, is that okay down there? We don't want to be part of the proofreadership. We want to be part of the authorship. It's a very different thought process as far as when I think we will feel like things are being affected at a core, more systemic level. And does that make sense?
Yeah, and I really appreciate you saying that, because I think that's a really important point. You know, like,
and I
hear that. Yeah.
One more point, real quick. In order to, what they really have to embrace, though, is in the tricky thing that they haven't really just kind of caught up on, is you need to embrace diversity as a competitive advantage.
Sure.
Like, that's what's up with business. Like I'm not saying don't get the money. You're in business, right? Get the money, for sure. But get the money in the right way. All money ain't good money, and understand that you can leverage diversity as a competitive advantage. And that doesn't mean tokenizing. That means understanding demographics and understanding that you have a demographic that has a buying power that can empower your brand. And I work with plenty of different brands that can understand that. Nike or whoever, whatever brand, we can stay out there, cite them as examples that may be embodying that and maybe living out that culture more at their core. So there's some opportunity in
and even beyond the race issue, there's half the world is women. I mean, maybe they could understand and reach out a little bit better to women riders, design bikes that work for women, and maybe put a few women on the board or the design team, or it's the same struggle. It's inclusivity, diversity as a competitive advantage.
Austin, I imagine that you have an opinion about inclusivity.
Yeah, well, for so many years we weren't included. We weren't in the magazines. It didn't matter how cool your bike was. It wasn't getting in the magazine. And it's good to see that we're finally getting in magazines, finally being recognized for the fact that we've been around forever. Like for me, 53 years. And it's nice. Nice. Yeah, 53 years behind bars. It's nice to be recognized. It's cool.
Sure. So you're still riding choppers, right? Like that's what you do.
Yeah, choppers, man. Dresses are for old men.
Please make a shirt.
you just alienated half of Ken's readership.
Nah, that's all right. I don't give a shit. I don't.
I'll be 75 in September, and
so great.
I'm not old enough to ride a dresser.
That's so great.
You're gonna go straight to the track.
So let's get a little bit off of the I mean, maybe we'll get off the race subject a little bit, but tell me about a trip that you've taken on that chopper, like a long trip.
Well, I've ridden from San Francisco to New York.
That's pretty hefty.
In 1971, and truthfully, in my mind, all I could think about was the end of Easy Rider.
Yeah.
Every mile I was riding, I was thinking about the ending of Easy Rider.
Sure.
And it actually turned out
not in a good way.
Not in a good way, no.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be one of the nicest trips. I was in Utah, riding down the highway, and a guy pulls up next to me on a knucklehead. And I look over. He just looks at me and nods his head like, hello. He doesn't say anything. He just nods like a hello. And he rides next to me for about 5 miles. And then all of a sudden he tells me to pull over. So I pull over. And when I stopped, there was a car behind us, a Cadillac. The Cadillac stopped. In the Cadillac was the guy's wife. The guy says to me, listen, man, it's getting ready to get dark. Where you sleeping tonight? I said, well, if it don't rain, I'm sleeping on the side of the road. If it rains, I'll find a cheap motel. He says, nah, man, you're coming home with me, man. Come on, follow me. We're going home. Guy takes me to his house. He lived in the middle of no place. No place. There was houses in the far distance. I'd say the nearest house to this guy was 5 miles away. And the guy says, man, when I saw you riding down the highway on that panhead, your soles were flapping. He said, you needed some boots. Your soles were flapping. I said, I got to take this guy home. The guy gave me a brand new pair of engineer boots, fed me, filled my gas tank up, and took me back on Route 80 and showed me how to get out of town.
Wow.
I get in Nebraska, and Nebraska, my 6-volt generator burnt the battery up. There is an adjustment on the generators. Most people don't probably even know, but you can retard them where they don't put out as much juice. And so I had to, a guy stopped and said, what's the matter, man? So I told him. He says, all right, there's a Harley dealer not too far away. I'll go get your battery. Guy went and got me a battery. Get back on the bike, get to Lincoln, Nebraska, stop in a gas station and ask the guy, do you have any 60-weight oil? The guy looked at me and said, 60-weight oil? Nah, we don't have no 60-weight oil. A guy in the station said, you must have a Harley someplace. I said, yeah, it's down the block. It don't have no oil. It ran out of oil. He says, my brother's got a shop in the house. Get whatever oil you can get. Follow me to the house, only a couple miles away. We got 60-weight oil. So I follow the guy to his house. Sure enough, his brother's got a full garage in the house. We drain the oil, put the 60-weight in. The guy says, where are you going? I said, New York. He says, listen, man, the gearing on your bike ain't right for the highway. Why don't you let me change your sprocket on your transmission? He says, I got a 26-tooth tranny sprocket that'll make your bike cruise down the highway. All right. We pull the bike apart, put that sprocket on, and cruised. You know, it was just total opposite of what I had in my mind was going to happen. I ran into nothing but good people.
You know, and that is for all the problems that we have, right? Like in society now, it's one of the things that I think is beautiful about the biker community, right? Like, how many times have you pulled over and helped somebody on the side of the road when you see them, right? I mean, how many times have you waved? And I said this, I think probably on the last podcast, I was like, I don't wave anymore. I'm like, I just don't do it. And I'm like, you know what? Don't be an asshole. Just wave. It's like the easiest thing to do, right? And so I've been embracing the wave again. But I feel like the biker community as a whole is really, really, and it's that, you know, couple bad apples thing, you know, which I don't know that I fully agree with, but I feel like it's that, like, we're getting there. We're making progress, right? Like and I feel like there's such a huge swath of support in the motorcycle industry for equity, inclusion, you know, people with different ideas and different ideals, and being able to go, hey, you know what? I'm going to put those aside and we're going to go ride. And it's cool. Like, and we're good, you know? But there's this small group, you know, that, I mean, I've gone in and unfriended a lot of people in the last month, you know, which bums me out. But when it comes to hate speak, like, I just can't do it, you know?
Well, even today.
And I feel like, you know, you kind of came up. Yep, exactly. You came up against something today, Paul, that I think is probably worth talking about.
That's amazing. I mean, I was excited. I was down in Mexico for 4 months with 64 Honda CL72. Hello, Austin. I brought my Super Hawk Scrambler down to Mexico for 4 months. And one of my good friends is a filmmaker. He also has a house down in Baja. And we shot this cool little Baja Honda film about the history of this Honda Scrambler being the first bike to travel the length of Baja. Dave Eakins in 1962 was the first motorcyclist to go from Tijuana to La Paz. And so last summer, my girlfriend Susan and I found one, and we said, okay, we're going to take it down to Mexico because it has a historic connection. And then a dear friend of Wil and Austin and mine had a connection at Petrolicious and offered to put that film up on the website. And it came up today. And unfortunately, what also came up today were some really deeply questionable tweets from the CEO of the website. And, we felt compelled to pull the film off of the site because, what do you do? We don't want to support this guy. We know the people who work there are awesome and amazing and diverse. And, especially our connection there. Hello, he made a film about Austin and Spade George.
Yeah.
So, but he prefers to remain nameless because he still has to work in the film industry. And yet the name of this website is stained forever because of some really stupid tweets by the CEO. And so there it is, it's just the reality. There's a bit of cancel culture issue there, which is,
Sure.
He was tried and convicted for saying something stupid and it tanked his business because 100% of his advertisers and 100% of his content generators, they all quit. They all said, we're not supporting you. You are, red hot toxic right now. So, that's just the climate we're in. You really got to watch what you say. As Will said, sometimes it's easier to deal with a snake when when it's a snake. But
I disagree about watching what you say.
Yeah.
I'm not backing that. I'm backing people who need to stand on their ethos. And if people are not brave to it, I don't have to wake up in the morning and think about who I am or question my thought process. And I don't know if that gentleman, he said what he felt, he feels that way. We need to know about it. And that's important. And what I like, this has been an interesting couple of weeks. And when all the racial tensions and that got heightened after Mr. Floyd's death and what an unfortunate circumstance it is, the byproduct of that are things like this conversation here.
Yeah.
This is important dialogue that we're having. This is not a small matter. This is hopefully exemplifying what healthy dialogue around these type of issues can look like. And we might all be of a different mind. It doesn't mean that me and Paul absolutely think alike. Maybe in a lot of cases, Paul and I probably are more similar than dissimilar. But it's important to be able to have dialogue with people who don't think like you and be able to articulate issues in a way that are non-aggressive, that do not carry anger, they're not necessarily non-accusatory. And in a cancel culture, what it doesn't do is leave room or opportunity for growth. At the end of this thing, we have to effectively come together, or united we stand and divided we fall. That's a real thing. I think there's something there. And the thing that I've been stressing to most people, including some of these companies, including some of these shows, including friends who've been consulting with me or I've been consulting with, is whatever you're talking about at your breakfast table and your dinner table or your boardroom table and your conference room table, this is reflected in your ethos. Yeah. So I don't have to ask Austin what he thinks. I can simply look at Austin, especially with social media. I can see how Austin has moved through his life, and it exemplifies what his values are. Does that make sense? And I think we don't take things like breaking bread for what it really is. The word comrade means to break bread, right? So this is a very important part of our ethos. I think certainly for us, as we've moved around globally with this bike thing for many years, who we sit down and eat with, and who we move with, and who we literally sleep in their homes, who we support their art, who we channel with their creative energies, who we beg favors from, how we get it done, like with Paul. This is as big a part of our ethos as any single thing. At no one time ever did it come up that I was black and Paul was white and wears fancy fucking shoes. It never once came up. We both got a bomb shoe selection. His happens to be better. But never once did it really, that's not really, to Austin's point, he's riding through that situation alone. The cat pulls up on the knucklehead. The other cat helps him out. Mainly because when we understand something about bikes, that automatically breaks down some barriers. Mm-hmm. There's a commonality there. And that was just enough. And them to see Austin the way they probably saw that dude and recognizing the difference, but at the same time, knowing very much what that ethos was, that this dude is riding his bike in his fashion, across the United States, they identify with that. Yeah. That's what they saw. They saw something similar and dissimilar. But they saw enough to be inviting and be open to the thought process of, hey, I can learn more about this cat, or I can respect something here. And that's what we've kind of gotten away from, man. I mean, the more that we sit at tables together, again, breakfast table, dinner table, boardroom table, conference table, the more inclusive we are, and if it's reflective, I hope it's reflective of where we hope to go.
Yeah.
I feel strongly about that. Any team I work with, whether it's my store team, whether it's our film team, it would reflect kind of how we move. How we get it done is very reflective about what our ethos or what our values are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think that there's a piece for me in this that's like, I just want to listen, because I know for me, there were years that I worked with people that were overtly racist. I mean, overtly. They weren't hiding it. And I put up with it for a paycheck, and put up with it because I had I could justify it by, having to feed my family or whatever, however you do it.
The things we do to eat.
Sure. And I'm not proud of it, but, I also, stood up to it a few times and was literally like laughed at, and like saying, hey, that's not okay. And getting minimized and it's a tough thing to get to. But I also feel like I'm in such a better place with it now where I know for me, it's like you said, Will, I know what my ethos is. I know where I stand morally. I know what's important to me. I know what I talk to my kids about. And it's, I this week, for the people that haven't heard of Samantha Francine, she was out of Montana. She's the young woman who had the guy yelling in her face, "Fuck you," at the protest in Whitefish, Montana. She has an amazing story. And I got to listen to part of that this week, and it just furthered. I'm doing a lot of that these days. I'm doing a lot of listening. A lot of these conversations for me are not, and it's not that they're uncomfortable when they happen, right? But going into them, I'm not like, oh, I'm excited about this. This is going to be real fun. Like, we're just going to talk about choppers and it's going to be fun, like I have on some other podcasts. But I feel like it's so important that people see the similarities and see the differences as well, right? And that we move forward, like arm in arm, bar to bar, because that's what we're doing. I know, like, if you guys come to Colorado, like, we're ripping canyons in Colorado. If I come to LA, like, I plan on riding with you, Austin, in New York. Like, it's, that's the thing. And that's the commonality. And I feel like that's where we can get people to recognize that commonality between us all, and I think it's important, I think it's really important. So I don't know where you guys are at with time and everything. I mean, we could go on forever, but I don't want to keep you guys forever. If you guys have any closing thoughts, or if you want to tell people where they can find you, that's great. I really appreciate you guys spending the time and coming on and giving us your download. It's really, it's super helpful, and I really take it to heart. So.
Okay. Well, let me start since everybody's quiet. Shovelhead Austin. That's Shovelhead 98 Austin on Instagram. Awesome. I wanted to say one other thing.
Yeah, please do.
And it was over the last 3 years, the hate has reared its ugly head again. And it's definitely coming out of Washington. And it's just making our situation so much worse than what it ever was. I won't say ever was, but what it hasn't been in a long time. And it definitely needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that.
Love that.
Yep.
I guess a parting thought for me is, I think that, as people move through these times, you can't underestimate, this life is experiential in nature. And that's not to be preachy, but I think what that means is to say, you have to remove yourself from your own little circle, your own little Facebook friends, your own little thing, and really put yourself in uncomfortable situations or what you might perceive to be uncomfortable situations to really experience the growth. And it's okay to come from a point of reference, but the only thing that you can do is you can stand to grow. And that means like get out of the country, eat some other food, sit with some other people, put yourself in some other experiences. And if it's through motorcycling and that's the gift, the biggest gift that this thing has brought me has been friends and experiences and relationships, and that empower me and that nurture me and that feed my soul. So that's been the biggest gift of ever owning a bike, regardless of a knucklehead, a panhead, a shovelhead, whatever it was. At the end of the day, it was the entree that it gave me to meet certain people and then further my own passions and further my own growth and actually impact people, hopefully in a positive way. I can't even understand a situation. I posted a quote from Lyson Hughes. He said, how long shall we wait till we can just find a place of beauty? You know what I mean? I don't even understand an ethos that requires hate or requires divisiveness or requires me to disavow somebody else's thing. Mm-hmm. You know, I hope that as we continue to move forward, that people will start to embrace those things and they move towards a positive transformation, whatever that means for them. But they have to be open to that. You know what I mean? They really do have to be open to that. And I don't know. Hopefully, you know, dialogues like this are moving people, you know, closer to that.
I agree. You want to plug your Instagram and your place of work?
Is it a good place or a bad place? I'm just curious. Instagram's interesting. That's a whole nother podcast, probably. My Instagram currently is at what is it? At Word is just a word. Mm-hmm. Word is just a word. Trico Store is my place of business. It's a store in Los Feliz, Hollywood, or on Hollywood Boulevard. We sell chopper apparel and accessories and helmets and things of that nature. Please support us as times are dire. We've been closed since March and just reopened this past week. So any and all support that way definitely helps. And then there's a few other ventures, forthcoming, whether it's film or something of those natures, is coming soon. So that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and these guys are way too shy about what they've done. And, I mentioned that Austin was the co-star of the film that Wil produced, Sugar and Spade, which documents their friendship since the late 60s and their remarkable photographs and their own stories. Amazing. And, through my various media portals, thevintagent.com, and now I've created a nonprofit called the Motorcycle Arts Foundation. We're dedicated to basically producing stories and films and things that aren't being produced. Films about Black riders or films about women riders or stories that just fell through the cracks that we find really interesting. As I mentioned on the last podcast, one of the big stories we're working on and we're actually gearing up to do a film on is the Cliff Voss story about his civil rights work, taking a chopper to, Alabama in 1963 and racing cops and taking a chopper as his vehicle to go register folks living in sharecropper shacks to vote before the Civil Rights Act was passed. So that's going to be a really interesting project. We've done a ton of research on it. And, but it's just one of the projects we're working on. I'm super happy to have been able to support, Wil and Austin on what they're doing. It's amazing, and I honor the wisdom of both of these gentlemen. They're truly both astounding people, and I'm very lucky to have gotten to know them over the years. I don't get to spend enough time with them, but I know they're there.
We get it in. We get it in when we can. Hey, I want to thank Paul and Ken. I want to thank you as well. One, I really appreciate anybody that uses their platform to project narratives of all kinds. Ours is one narrative. Joe Michel would say, are you a white writer or are you just a writer? Joe Michel said, no, I use all colors, not just black. So as much as I understand that the perspective is, Austin and I happen to be black or people of color, and we happen to ride choppers. At the heart of this thing, we just love bikes. I mean, I met Austin because he reflected imagery of myself that I'd never seen. You know what I mean? It's somebody that I can look to help guide me along the path in the motorcycling thing. And you know, this is the horse we rode in on. So this is the platform where we stand to try to make an impact, to try to say something, you know, that is reflective at least of how we think and feel. And people might not get with it, but I'm proud of the fact that Austin is a shining example of living out the ethos that I strive. You know what I mean? I strive to be like that. So so that's what's up with me. Paul as well. So that's what's up with me.
Well, I really appreciate it. Yeah, I really appreciate it, guys. Really appreciate you taking the time. Swedish Fish. Ooh, love Swedish Fish. Let's Ripper Magazine with Jimi Hendrix. That's a good cover.
Jimmy.
So we try to be here every Tuesday at about the same time. Next week, my understanding is it's Michael Lichter and Sugar Bear are going to be coming on. The week after that should be Portia Taylor, I believe. I'm really trying to, if you have suggestions on people to talk to, please, it's not that easy to get guests that want to talk. So I really appreciate it. I also want to hear from people who have opposing views. And I'm happy to talk to anyone. But I really appreciate you guys coming on. And 4Ever2Wheels podcast 148 is in the books, and I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Great talking, Ken.
Yeah.
See you later, boys.
Thanks, Ken. Later.
Take care, guys. It was a good show.
See you, Austin. Thank you.
Take care.